I went home and my mom patched me up and I said, why don't we just change our name? She was a tough Irish lady with 9 kids. And she said, adversity builds character. We're not changing our name. And she said it in a way, don't ever bring that subject up again. This is the way it is.
I don't do that. Okay, great. Smiling. Yeah, okay, so I have to tell you, I read your introduction on Twitter, of course, but I had noticed you on Twitter before that because I'd seen this name come up, John Hitler, and it was like, wow, even though there's a double T, it's like this guy's name is Hitler and the pronunciation's still the same. Like, that's so interesting. It just sparks, it's like, huh, okay. And then you wrote your introduction, which I was like, wow, there are some stories here. Like, this guy has 6 kids, 3 adopted from Russia. And then you've written 3 books. You've done a TED talk about finding genius talent, which is really cool. You've founded 9 companies. Like you said, half were dumpster fires. So, and you've had all these different things happening. So I'm like, this is interesting. And then I started reading your book, 1 in a Billion. And that story is so cool at the start that you basically, I mean, I'll let you tell it, but it's like you don't get into Georgetown and then you basically turn up there anyway. And you're like, I'm going to take the place of someone who hasn't shown up. And it was just, wow, you've got a pregnant girlfriend who you just met and you'd like driven across the country. So I'm like, this is so cool. But let's start with how you grew up.
Sure. So we grew up one of 9. I'm one of the forgotten middle ones. We didn't use names in the middle because there were so many. I mean, they'd just go, let me see, you're number, what are you, 4 or 5? I was the 4th of 9. A kid a year, Irish Catholic. And ironically, we grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, which was really weird. Just happenstance. My parents, I grew up in Detroit. So union, odd, one industry only, like a factory town, like you see in a lot of places. And in the late 60s, there were riots in Detroit and they burned the city down. The place went crazy. Fair enough. That was happening everywhere with civil rights in the United States. So anybody that still lived in Detroit said, we got to get out of here. It's too dangerous, especially if you had kids. So we moved, like everybody, to what they called clean family living, which was code for white people only in the suburbs. And we went one tick north of middle class. We were not high end, but my dad was an executive. But with 9 kids, we weren't going to ever be in the rich suburbs. Problem is, you buy a new neighborhood, you don't know who the neighbors are. And we moved in, and it was primarily a Jewish neighborhood. Oh, great. So now you're going to do school, sports, community, scouting, anything like that. It's going to be you. If you're going to participate, it's going to be you with Jewish kids, and your last name is Hitler. So it's one of those things where God has a sense of humor. And I was in fights, all that kind of stuff. And I gave a TED talk about a year ago about what it was like growing up with that last name. Because at one point I got the crap beaten out of me. I mean, just bloodied and stitches and the whole deal, because there was anger and whatnot. And it wasn't the first time. And usually I won the fights because I had to fight all the time. And the kids picking on you, they thought because they were bigger than you were, they were going to take you out. Well, if you know how to fight, size is not that big a deal. But I went home and my mom patched me up and I said, why don't we just change our name? Now consider her plight. She married it. So it wasn't her name either. And she was a tough Irish lady with 9 kids. And she said, adversity builds character. We're not changing our name. And it was like, and she said it in a way, don't ever bring that subject up again. This is the way it is. And I was like, that was actually helpful because it was clarity to say, oh, that's not a possibility. Okay, good. Then I have to figure out something else. But that was my upbringing. It was very strict, like not strict, very traditional, um, suburban and Catholic, which is a little odd because there's tons of rules, none of which make sense. So
Where does your dad's side of the family come from?
his mom, so there's four grandparents. Three of them came from, including his mom, came from the same county in Ireland within about 10 miles of each other, and they didn't know each other. And then the paternal grandfather, the one with the bad last name, came from Alsace-Lorraine area it's a disputed area between Germany and France. But that was always the family name, and that was the spelling. And the bad guy, it wasn't his real name. He changed it in prison, I think in the late 20s. And there's a
Huh.
whole big long cycle. Yeah, he had Jewish ancestry, and the suffering that he and his family had, he attributed to the Jewish side of the family, and that was part of his psychoses. Was he then villainized all Jews as the scourge and the whole deal? I mean, a nut, a genius, both obviously a mass murderer, the whole deal. But he changed it because he had an Austrian and a Jewish name. And I speak German, and I can't tell the difference between a German and an Austrian name because they're all Germanic. But he changed it to Hitler, but one T. And so our family never changed it, and they were tough enough that they just kept it.
Huh. And your ancestor came to the US before the World War II.
Yeah. Yeah. We were. I think most of them came. The Irish ones all came in the potato famine. They all came because they were starving in Ireland. So that would, what's that, mid 1800s. I don't know when the Hitlers came, but I think about the same time. So they must have, because, yeah, I think they came 1860s or 1870s. So they had long since had the name, and it was not a problem. It was just a German name. So yeah.
Hmm. That was my family as well. Sorry, from Ireland, potato
Yeah.
famine, but Australia.
Yep. That's very, very typical, as a lot of Irish people that came here came after the potato famine. So they didn't have a whole lot of choice. So, yeah.
And so what so just to be clear, like I feel like it goes without saying, but just because we know the internet is a crazy place, like you don't having the name doesn't mean you associate with these beliefs and you
No,
don't have a problem with people of different ethnicities.
my wife is Indian. My first wife was from Sri Lanka. I have kids from Russia. Um, I do service work in Africa and Mexico. I speak Spanish. Um, yeah, I'm a I have a rule, and I've got a lot of rules in life, but one of them is to treat every individual as a precious child of God. So as long as God can look you in the eyes and find value for you, then it's my job to do the same thing. Now I don't always live up to that standard, but it doesn't matter. Race, creed, color, it just doesn't matter. Everyone is part of humanity. Who cares what color or country of origin or sexual preference, or it doesn't matter. Um, treat people well. Treat them as part of the global family. Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. So what was the bullying about? Because surely kids are smart enough as well to know, like, okay, this guy obviously isn't actually related to Hitler or
Yeah,
believes in what
it's
Hitler did.
you might think so. The problem was, I'm old enough that me growing up was not that long after World War II. So the kids that I was growing up with still had certainly stories of grandparents or uncles or aunts or maybe people who they might have grown up with, like young cousins who were killed in the concentration camps. And you can imagine it's still the predominant narrative in the Jewish tradition. It's still an issue. People have this, I find, insane idea that maybe it never happened, like it was a fallacy and it was a narrative that was made up by the press. It's like, okay, we didn't go to the moon either and all that, like, whatever. But those are kids who grew up in their family with this guy as the villain of their entire faith. And then I show up in grade school and sit next to him in math class. That's not going to go so well, because 12-year-olds on the playground or 10-year-olds on the playground aren't rational or reasonable. And I was also insanely competitive. I was a good athlete and competitive. So you finally get to go out at lunchtime and play. Well, what if I scored the winning goal or played well against? That just made it worse. Because a 10-year-old is going to take that and then be mad because they lost the game, and then you start chirping a little bit, and then all of a sudden you get trouble. That it was usually not trouble at school. It was usually trouble after school with kids I didn't know, because the kids in the neighborhood would come. Almost always the bullying was myself and a best friend or two, because we rode bikes everywhere. That was our transportation. We'd get around and go to the playground. We'd ride bikes. Teenagers in cars. So we're 12 or 13, and 16-year-olds, 4 or 5 of them in a car, would pull up, run us off the road, and confront us. Well, it's 5 against 2 or 5 against 3, and they're 2 or 3 years older and bigger, and you got to work your way out of that, because they were coming there mostly to scare you, and that was most of the time it, and push you and whatnot. But sometimes they were just coming there to beat the crap out of you, and you had to figure that out. That's a tricky thing to figure out at 11 or 12. So.
Okay, yeah. So it's just kind of like the kid with the stupid name in the neighborhood. Let's go and beat him up.
Right, and Delia, you were probably picked on for a number. Kids are kids, and at 10 years old, you get a bad nickname for the color of your hair, or because you have braces, or because you're the first one to have pimples, or it doesn't matter. Kids are going to do that, but most of it passes. And for me, unless we're going to change the name, but I don't know if my parents ever thought of it, because my dad had a very successful career. Didn't slow his career. I mean, he essentially retired running Jeep. He was very successful in the auto industry. That was the feeling or the theory in our house, or the philosophy, I should call it, is that people are going to judge you by your character, not by your last name. So earn their trust, earn their respect. Fair enough. Mm-hmm. I get that. But it's hard when 10-year-olds aren't rational. 12-year-olds aren't. 16-year-old boys are not rational. It wasn't girls that would pick on us. I mean, they might say stuff, but it was bullies. Fine. There's bullies everywhere. And there was a lot to learn from that that's helped me as an adult. So
I'm also thinking of you on the sports pitch. Like, you can't exactly be cheering for you and your surname. Or I guess, did people just refer to you as John and not use your surname?
Well, so in high school you wore a jersey. At least I was a very good American football player, and your jersey had your name on the back. So every team knew, and I was the captain of every team I ever played on. I never thought much about it, because the rules on the field were pretty clear. And if I could play better than you, or my team could play better than you, then we would win. And if we didn't play as well as you, but it's a team sport, and I was a good player. Fair enough. But afterwards, there was usually the respect of we both played hard. Wow, you're a good player, and we beat you, or vice versa. There was that, and there were also parents there, and there were coaches, and so that was pretty well regulated. It was the unscripted stuff. Yeah, usually teenage kids in a car screeching up, and they knew because they had siblings or whatever, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, they always play after school. They always play here, and then they ride their bikes home." And everybody, these are the days where the old white pages where your parents' name, it would say Hittler, Daniel, 18530 Saratoga Avenue, Lathrop Village, Michigan, and your home phone number was all right there in the white pages, and nobody opted out of that. I mean, that was for the Rockefellers to opt out. Nobody had a private number. Nowadays, nobody has. There is no white pages. There's no listing. But yeah, kids could drive up on a Friday night, like, and throw stuff at our house, because that's what teenage boys do. We kind of grew up with that, and my parents did a good job of not normalizing it, but just minimizing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was some of that was odd. Oh well, yeah.
And your response to being ganged up on was to learn how to fight back.
So this is the odd paradox. This is there were some themes in my life, and this was, I would say, a platform for what I call my genius talent. My genius talent is creating seemingly impossible outcomes that address multiple divergent agendas. And the number one rule my mom had, she was smart enough to realize, no fighting. That was her number one rule, because she realized if we were going to fight every time a kid threw a rock at us or called us a name, we'd be in the principal's office or the police station all the time. The problem was, when she went to the grocery store and people in the community knew who she was and whispered, quietly, they weren't punching her in the face. And if a 16-year-old's there ready to kick your butt, I can understand the rule, but if I know I can take that kid out with one punch, because I knew how to break a kid's nose at 12, I did it. And the trick was, I had to do it without having any marks on me, because if I went home and it was obvious that I had a black eye from a fight, then I was in big trouble, way worse than the bully. So it was ironic, but you had to be an effective fighter. It was an odd ecosystem, but efficient, because I had to be there was always more of them than there were of me. I was always younger, and it was my best friend as well. And whoever that was at the time, they didn't have any dog in the fight. Their last name wasn't mine. The bullies weren't looking for them. They were just an innocent, and my best friends. So this is one of the ironic things I learned. Imagine you were my best friend. You had to know that you're going to come in harm's way and still be okay with that. Every one of my best friends ever said, they come after you, they're coming after me, because you'd never be my best friend otherwise. So as an adult, people say, you're either super loyal or you have nothing to do with people. And that's kind of who I am. I don't dismiss people, but I don't do fair weather, because I learned about best friend. Like, they literally they went into harm's way as well, and went outnumbered with me willingly. And you go, that's a friend that you say, yeah, I'll do anything for them, because they'll do anything for me. And people that are these days online friends, Facebook friends, whatever, acquaintances, I get all that, but I'm not super interested in that. So I have very, very deep, close relationships with a tribe, and then I also have a presence online with tons of people. But and then I have a lot of people. It's just like, kind of not my type. It's not that they're not my type. It's that they're not invested. And so I'm just not that interested in that. I learned that as a kid. Would I have learned differently if I had a different experience? Maybe. But that's one of the ways I play. And people say, my wife notices it. She's a little bit the same way. So we get along fine. But yeah, you learn these things by happenstance. But that was my mom's rule, was no fighting. So when I did get my butt kicked and came home, and what I wanted was a little sympathy, I got grounded. I was like, what? And I knew I was going to get grounded. So it wasn't, that's why you wanted to win the fight. You were defending yourself or just trying to survive. But if you really got your butt kicked, and I did, you were in big trouble when you got home, because she knew that wasn't the answer.
And so what was it like growing up with nine of you? 8 siblings? How many boys, how many girls?
5 boys, 4 girls. It was there was autonomy. You were in, it was a little odd in our house. And I know other people from big families, they all said the exact same thing. There were absolutely explicit rules that no one ever told you and everyone knew. So, for instance, we knew as kids that we had to do well in school. That was expected. There was no sloughing off. We also knew we had to go to college and put ourselves through college because no one ever said, look, dad's paying for prep schools to get you ready for college, but there's no way you can pay for prep schools for 6 or 7 while there's 3 in college. So you were responsible from age 0, like when you came out of the womb, to make your own money and save enough for college. I didn't bother me, but no one ever told me that. I just knew that. So did all my siblings. But there were tons of rules like that. And so it was kind of, obviously we were close, and some of us hung out together because of a kid every year. And this, just natural groups formed. And like, I wasn't very close with my sisters. I had 2 sisters that were older than me by a year and 2 years. And then a brother that was older than me by 4 years. So I was number 4. Well, he and I had different friends because we were in different schools, and my sisters went to all girls schools and I went to an all boys school. So like, we didn't have shared friends. And then there were a bunch of boys after that. So we commuted to school and we hung out more so all those things just happened because of birth order and gender and all that kind of stuff. But we were close, and yet everyone you ran your own deal. You were autonomous, and as long as you're home for dinner and did your chores and that kind of stuff, nobody gave you any trouble. So
Amazing. And then, so how did you, yeah, because you wrote that in the book that you saved, was it $12,000 by the time you were 18? And you
yeah,
needed
and
to,
now this is 12. This is 12 in today's money. That would be about 4x. It'd be about maybe 40 grand or 45 grand, and that's by mowing lawns, shoveling snow, babysitting. I babysat one weekend every month, or one night of every weekend every month, because there were people that went out. Nobody wanted to do babysitting, and you made almost no money. But if I was going to have to sit at home and do nothing, why not sit at your house and have you pay me I think it was like $1.50 an hour for a 3-year-old kid who would go to sleep at 7:30, and I would just watch TV. And the funny thing is, the place that I would, I can say this now because my parents they can't punish me anymore. But they had he subscribed to Playboy magazine, so I'm like 13 years old going to babysit for $1.50 an hour, and the guy subscribes to Playboy. It's like, this is awesome. So I was like, yeah. And you saved all of it. We didn't have big expenses. We had to buy our own clothes. We had to, buy our own shoes, our own clothes, all that kind of stuff. So you had to support yourself and save money. Yeah. No.
wow, from what age?
Support yourself about 10. So all of my siblings worked. All of them did. We worked at what you could do. I had a paper route. I think I got it when I was 6. You couldn't get one at 6, but my brother was 10 and he had one. So he signed up for a second one. And I remember my parents said, we are not driving you if it snows, because Detroit's got bad weather. If it snows or rains, if you're sick in the morning, you got to get your butt out of bed at 5:30 and go deliver 60 papers, and you're 6 years old or 7 years old. And then you'd go to school. You made I worked it out at one point. It must have been about $1.10 a day to deliver papers. It was a terrible financial deal, but you can't get a job before legally, you can't get a job before you're 14. So it was a good job to have, because you got $1.10 times 30 days. You made about $35 a month, for which you had, not much to spend it on. You could save 30 of it from the time you're 6 years old. And go, okay. We all shoveled snow. We did everything you could in the neighborhood to make money, and we all saved it, because we all knew the deal. And some were better than others. I was pretty good at saving, because I made more than my siblings, because I didn't work at restaurants and that stuff. I always worked for myself and could make way more money doing that. So I had more money saved. And it was all gone by the time I was like 19. It was all gone that first year in college and getting pregnant and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. uh, uh,
Did your
oh well.
mum work at all between the between having 9 kids?
So at one point she wanted pocket change because you can imagine how tight money was. So she didn't have like spending money just to clown around with. So she took a job 2 days a week. There was a local newspaper. It was like Tuesday and Saturday it got delivered. And they needed people like her who had a station wagon. Everybody had a station wagon to put the wholesale newspapers in, and they deliver 50 to your house because you were one of the kids that delivered it on Tuesday and Saturday. So while you were at school, she would go pick it up because she could, kids could go off to school. She could go get a load full of these newspapers and then deliver them to the 25 kids that each had a paper route. And she got a little bit of money for that. She would do little things like that, but you could imagine it was enough just trying to run a house, cooking, and it was, a little bit of a zoo, a little bit of self-organization. Like a lot of us did our own laundry just because it was easier. But yeah, there was still a lot to maintain in a household with 11 people in it. So she ran the house. So
Huh. And your dad really prioritized education then, if that's where he was what he was
both my
putting
parents
money
believed
towards.
very strongly in education. They wanted two things. They wanted Catholic education, wanted college prep. So they made the sacrifice, and it was quite substantial to put us through good prep schools. And we all went to Catholic grade school, those were good too. The Catholic grade schools, they still are, I think. And then I went to a Jesuit prep school, and my sisters went to run by some order of the nuns because they were divided on the sexes, so they couldn't go to our prep school. But yeah, they did all that, and then it was kind of like at 18, you go off to college, but you're going to pay for it, and you can do it with student loans, you can do it with scholarships and your own savings. But we were on our own. We all worked while we were at school. We all, as soon as we came home, we had summer jobs. We had those set up well in advance because you just couldn't afford to go to school without doing that. But that was just normal in our house. That didn't seem bad at all. So.
And what was it that they wanted for you aside from going to college?
Yeah, so you got to remember the generation. You're in Detroit, which is not an entrepreneurial place. They wanted us to be able to get a good job, secure, and probably have a family and a lifestyle like they did, which was safe suburbs, in my language, boring life, predictable, and upstanding. And I wasn't having any of that. Yeah.
Huh. Did you know that, like, from what age did you know that wasn't what
I couldn't
your path
I
was
couldn't
going to
wait
be?
to I couldn't wait to leave. Yeah. I knew at 11 that I was done with the Catholic Church, because it was so hypocritical. But I knew by 14 or 15, I couldn't wait to get out of there. I didn't know where I wanted to go, but I knew that wasn't it. And the seminal event was I couldn't get a summer job one summer because the auto union went on strike. So they wanted higher wages. So that's fine. They want higher wages, but the problem is Detroit's a union town. So all the restaurant workers in solidarity went on strike as well. So I couldn't go work part-time as a busboy or a dishwasher for minimum wage one summer because the union or the auto union was on strike. And I'm thinking, what kind of a stupid place is this that they do it that way? But that's Detroit. It's not as bad now. Now what's happened is all the auto unions have just left and gone to Tennessee and North Carolina and other places who don't force the auto companies to use union labor. They just said, come to Tennessee and you can hire anybody you want. So they all just left. But when we were growing up, and I thought, what kind of a stupid system and economy is this? I also wanted to see the world. I didn't know what was out there, but I knew that was something more than Detroit. Detroit was a safe, predictable place to grow up. And I wasn't interested in that. I wanted I wouldn't call it adventure at the time. I would have called it more exciting, but what I really wanted was adventure. So
Cool. Okay, so then this is where you so you applied to Georgetown, but you don't get in, and then you end up spending half your money going to some college that you just
well, that
didn't know
wasn't.
anything about.
Yeah, so it's a little bit more of a story of that. So this is the seemingly impossible thing. So I went off to a place that I didn't want to go. I had a safety school. I'll show it. Michigan looks like this, the state where I grew up. Detroit is here. And if you go across the state on the western side, it's about a 2.5 hour drive. There's a city called Kalamazoo. Um, and my safety school was Kalamazoo College. They called it K College because it's very highly regarded, liberal arts, all that kind of stuff. Fine. But I didn't want to go there. I didn't even visit it. It was just my safety school. So since I didn't get into Georgetown, I schlepped off to Kalamazoo College. And in the first 2 weeks, I knew this is not where I want to be. It was worse than grade school. My high school was way more sophisticated and mature. That it was like junior high school, but you could live in dorms. And I said, in my head, I said, there's no way in hell I'm giving $6,000 of my 12,000 that I had saved in my entire life to this school to go. So I kind of marched in with this girl who I had met in the first couple of weeks at orientation, who became my first wife. But she had the same experience. She was from Palo Alto, California, and they let her in because she was only 16. She was brilliant, but she was only 16 and just never graduated high school. So they let her in. We both said, this sucks. And we decided together we were going to leave. Well, we walked in and they said, oh, hey, Dean Delia, we want our money back. And they said, oh, you can leave, but we can't resell your spot, so you don't get a refund. And I was like, I instantly thought, there's no way that could be right. So it took me a second. I said, well, surely you must have exemptions for family or medical emergencies. And they said, those are the only two ways you get out. And I said, I literally said, I'll see you tomorrow. And we went downtown to a free clinic and I had a heart murmur growing up. I still have it. I mean, you don't outgrow it. And I knew it. So I said, can you do an EKG? I think there's something wrong with my heart. I knew I had a heart murmur. And they wrote on a little piece of paper about this big, like a prescription pad, heart murmur, signed it from the East Flea Street Clinic. And then she had something else like toe fungus or dandruff or something innocuous. She got a little thing too. We both walked in we had to pay $5 each at the clinic. We each walked in the next day with our medical emergency. It took us 3 days to get out of there, but we got out of there with full refunds. And because there was no way I was giving my money. And so I had dropped out of school, and I'm 2 weeks in, and I called my dad, who worked for Jeep. Jeep had pickup trucks. People know Jeeps, but they don't think of Jeeps as pickup trucks. They still make pickup trucks. So I called him and I said, any chance you can come and pick me up? This is a mistake. I'm going to do it somewhere else, but I'm not going to waste my money here. I'm sure he wasn't happy to hear that, but because I'm the fourth and everyone else has done it by the book, I was not the by the book kid. I was the rebel. So he shows up to pick me up. He comes after work. He drives the 2.5 hours across the state on a Thursday night, and he's expecting me to throw all my stuff, a couple of bags into the back of the pickup truck. Well, then there's this girl. So it's her stuff in there too. It's a pickup truck and there's no back seat. So there's just the bench. It's my dad, Johnnicky, and me. No radio all the way home. Not a word said. And my dad was stoic. He couldn't have lost his cool all the time because it was chaos at times in our house. If he lost his cool all the time, he would have gone insane. So he just didn't say anything all the way home. And talk about it uncomfortable. We get about 2 blocks from our family home, and we're pulling off into the residential area. And he said, "Have you thought about your next move?" And I'm going, in my head, I'm 18. I just dropped out of school. I'm really curious about this girl, but I don't really know her. No, I don't. There's no next move. There's no plan here. There's no next move. And 2 days later, we got on a train across the country and moved to Palo Alto, California. That's and that was it. I was gone. I was out, and I was out of school. I was out of Michigan, and I was off to California. Um, and none of it was scripted, but it didn't take long.
Oh, because that's where she was from.
That's where she. Well, we voted. We didn't even discuss it. We didn't. We liked each other, but we didn't know each other. And he said, "Well, where do you want to? You want to stay here with my parents?" And she's like, "Well, let's just vote on it." Okay, how many for Palo Alto? Oh, it's a 2-0 vote. Okay, yeah, let's go to Palo Alto. And then it was, how do we get there? And again, we were frugal, so you could buy a $99 pass and you go anywhere in the country. 3 days on an Amtrak, not in a sleeper car, just in those plastic seats, no showers, no nothing. And it doesn't really stop. It doesn't, they don't take 2 hours delays where you can go in and do one of those pay showers. So 3 days, we ended up in Oakland, California, which is about 45 minutes. And then I think her mom came and picked us up. And it was like, welcome to California. Hello. And I've been here ever since. So.
Wow. And was that your first time? Like, had you traveled much at all?
No, I never left the state. Yeah,
Wow.
our family didn't do that. We didn't do vacations. We didn't go to Europe, or we didn't go to Florida. We didn't do any of that stuff. We took a 1-week vacation, a couple hours from our house at a lake at a little cottage. Same cottage every year. It was nice. But after about doing it, when a little kid, it's always fun. But, once you hit about 12, it's the same vacation you've had for the last 12 years. And it's like, you don't know any better because you haven't seen anything else. And then you go to California and say, oh, we can go to the ocean today. It's a half hour away. Oh, we can go to the ocean, the Pacific Ocean? Oh, that'd be cool.
Oh my God.
You can do that every day,
Wow.
let alone once a year for a week.
Wow. So you would never have seen the ocean before.
I'd seen nothing. No, we lived in suburbia. Yeah. So you've got this little bubble of a life that's very scripted, and everybody had that life. It still exists. You see kids in the suburbs, and I feel bad for them because they're trying to mimic somebody else, like an influencer or a rap star, because their life is so dreadfully boring because they live in a scripted suburbs, and their life is scripted too. Their parents have scripted their life for them. My life was scripted. It wasn't scripted in a bad way. The script was a good script. It just wasn't for me.
Huh. And so your family were just kind of like, okay, John's doing his thing. Like, whatever.
No,
He'll
they were
figure it
more.
out.
They were. My mom was pissed, and then 3 months later, we were pregnant. It's like, oh, great. So he's 18 and pregnant. Oh, this is a disaster. Mostly because what are the neighbors going to say? Not because that's such a horrible thing. And we got married, but yeah, we're 17 and 18, pregnant, and not in school. Yeah, that was not part of what my mom was hoping to be able to brag about in her Christmas newsletter. Yeah. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
And so what did you do? Oh my God, I'm just thinking the train ride across the country must have been amazing for you, like seeing all these different landscapes and things.
You don't see them that much. There's the Rockies were really pretty, but most of it's cornfields and wheat fields. It's just most of the middle of the United States is farm, and it's flat and boring. But it was interesting just to see the vastness of it, to say, wow, it's another full day of cornfields and wheat fields. What state are we in? Oh, we're in Nebraska. Weren't we in Nebraska yesterday? Yeah, we're still in Nebraska. You go, oh, God, that's a huge, and you see it on a map and you go, oh, yeah, you're right. It's big and long, and well, just takes forever to get through because there's a lot there. Both coasts are you got oceans, and then the Rocky Mountains in the 2/3 of the way were very pretty. So yeah, it was cool, but it was cool like I'm free. That's what it felt like.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I've driven from New York to California before, and it was a lot of boring
Yeah, there's
stuff.
not a
But
whole
yeah,
lot in
some
the
cool
middle.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're
Iowa, not a
right,
highlight.
Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, all those states, they're flat and wheat fields. It's either wheat or corn, depending on how far north you are. Yeah. And the train we took was north, so we saw mostly corn. Corn was in Michigan. I knew what corn looked like. It's not that interesting. Not for 3 days.
Okay, and then what did you do when you got to California? Like, were her parents cool about it?
Totally. Well, her dad was her dad had passed away. Um, he had gone back to her dad was Sri Lankan and her mom was British. The dad had gone back to Sri Lanka and had an accident on a boat and drowned. So her dad had passed away, and her mom lived in Palo Alto in a dinky little house. And we took over the garage. There was a 1 bedroom garage or a 1 car garage, like just enough for like a Cooper Mini, and you could fit a small bed in there. So that's where because they didn't have any room for us. So we slept the washing machine, the dryer, and we set up a bed out there, and that's all you could fit in there. And that's where we stayed because they didn't really have any room for us. They were welcoming, but they didn't have any room for us. Fine. And we went to work. We both went to work and helped with the finances because of the family, could use the help. I was like, that was fine. But the wages were twice what they were in Detroit because California it's always been more expensive. And so we had no housing costs and the wages were twice as good. I was thinking, this is awesome. Oh.
And what were you doing for work? Were you chopping wood or something?
I was the laborer on a landscape installation crew. So what was happening was Silicon Valley at the time was orchards. It was almond orchards, cherry orchards, apricot orchards, and then they developed the silicon chip in the 70s. And all of a sudden, it took a little bit, but it took 10 or 15 years. All of a sudden, this was a boom town. So they sold all that because it's right in the perfect landscape and building houses. But it had been sun-baked earth for millennial, forever. And my job was to dig the trenches to put the irrigation in. So when you built a little backyard, you had water for your plants and your lawn. So I would swing a pick for between 8 and some days 12 hours. It was really, really hard work. I was 18. I was strong, but I lost 40 pounds in 6 months. Not because I needed to lose 40 pounds, because you cannot eat enough calories to cover that. I was in great shape, but I also thought, this is going to kill me. There's no way I can keep doing this. And that's when we both drove back to the East Coast and went to school. I said, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I also worked in restaurants at night. So I knew how to cook. So I could be a short order cook. So I'd work landscaping in the morning, take a quick shower, and then go work until usually 9 or 9:30 at a little restaurant, and then do the whole thing over the next day. So we were just making as much money as we could. And yeah.
And then what was the idea to go to the East Coast?
We both knew we wanted to get. So my first wife was a doctor. She's brilliant, but she was 17, and we had both dropped out of school. She had been accepted at the New School for Social Research in New York City, and so she was good. I had nothing, and so I had to, unless we were going to be apart, I was going to drive across this country anyhow. And I thought, well, why don't I just? It never dawned on me that I couldn't figure out a way to get into Georgetown. I just wasn't sure how to do it, and I don't remember whether I told my wife at the time that I had not been accepted, or I think we were going to go either way. So I dropped her off in New York, and I drove 4 hours down to Washington, D.C., and we knew the schedules were close. So that semester we were going to be apart. She was pregnant at New School, awaiting our daughter, and I was going to go one semester at Georgetown. Then at Christmas time, the first semester, we were going to connect up, and the baby was supposed to come in February. So I got in. I talked my way into a full ride, and 4 years later, I graduated. But our daughter came in November, 16 weeks early. So now we're 19 and 18 with a severe preemie, like 1.5 pounds. And she's in neonatal preemie care. And we're going in New York City, and I wasn't in New York City. So I would come up every second weekend. I could come up for about 36 hours and see her but it was pretty chaotic. And then She didn't get out of the hospital till March. So she was in the hospital for almost 5 months. And that's when my wife came down to DC. And then we did both schools for a while, and we both got through, obviously. But the idea was to get one of us through so I could make money. And then she could go full time. And she went to school the whole time, just not full time. And so we figured
And
all that out.
was she annoyed at you for going to DC? Or it was like,
No, no, she was totally supportive. And she actually graduated from UC Santa Cruz. She went to new school for a year or two and then realized, how do you study biology at a school that doesn't have a lab? She was a biology major as pre-med. Well, it was kind of like the philosophy of biology because it's the new school for social research. They're not a math and science school. They're a humanities and sociology school. So that wasn't going to work really well, but they would let her in because remember, she never graduated from high school. So she quit high school. She had perfect SAT scores. She was brilliant and she was bored. So she quit at 15, I think. And the problem is if you're 15, they won't let you in the dorms at a college. So even though she wanted to go to college and she was smart enough, they wouldn't let her. So she just took a couple of years off and yeah.
And so where did you get the car? You put some of your savings towards
Oh,
that.
we bought a VW bus, of course, and actually at that point we still had our VW Bug. We bought a 1965 VW Bug, missing the two front fenders, for $500, and that was our car, and it ran. We put everything we owned in it, which was not much, and drove across the country. And the starter went out, so we would not turn it off for like 2 days at a time. We drove straight through for 2 days. And we didn't like turning it off because the only way to start it again was you had to push it and then bump start it. And with everything we owned, we could do that when there was nothing in it. But with everything we owned, it was too heavy and we had a hard time bump starting it. So gas stations are always on level ground. So if you stop it and turn the engine off, it's hard. We knew when we parked, we'd park on a little bit of a decline so that when you had to bump start it, you could roll it downhill and bump start it pretty easily. But for 2 days straight, we drove across the country. She eventually fell asleep at the wheel in the middle of South Dakota, and we ran off the road. But there's no difference between the road and the field. It's all the same level. So we were just spinning around in a thing of dust. We both kind of woke up, and when we stopped spinning, it was like, maybe we should take a nap. Maybe we should. maybe we should. The car was still running, so we got it off the field and onto the road. And we drove for a little bit and found a place we could take a nap. We were both exhausted, but we had to make it through. So it's fine. It's fine.
And did you stop back into your parents on the way?
We stopped on the way home. We stopped at my parents' very briefly, and that was super uncomfortable. And we stopped there because it was kind of on the way, and it was kind of the right thing to do. But it was super uncomfortable. My mom especially was she was not happy. So I understand.
And how were you feeling about the pregnancy?
Oh, I was excited. I mean, it wasn't our plan, but no, I was super excited. So, yeah.
And then at what point did you get married?
We got married before we took off from California back. So we got married about less than a year after we met. So we were probably 2 or 3 months pregnant. But as soon as she found out she was pregnant, it was like, oh, wow. I mean, it was kind of like, wow, okay. And then we said, yeah, let's get married. Let's get married. We had no hesitancy about that at all. No.
And it was just like her family came.
Yeah,
your family didn't.
We had about a dozen people in a county park, and it was very sweet. It was very nice. So.
Wait, so wasn't your mum fine then if you were then married, or it was more like this is just happening?
No, because we weren't. First of all, we were living in sin, and then we had a child before we were married, which you're not supposed to do, and then we didn't get married in the Catholic Church. So by her way of thinking, because again, this is some of the insanity we grew up with. It's insanity like at a very low level. There were two religions growing up, Catholic and non-Catholic. Those are the only two religions. So it was basically the guys that are going to go to heaven, which is Catholic, and everybody else sucks. Well, we didn't get married in a Catholic church because they wouldn't marry teenagers who were pregnant. So we had I think a Unitarian minister or something who knew we were 3 months pregnant. She did marriage counseling and whatnot. And she married us, and it was like, cool. Well, by my mom's way of thinking, we had jumped over a broomstick or done something like that. And so it didn't count. So we weren't really married, and we were going to have a child out of wedlock. And it's just like, whatever. And that was some of the rigidity that we grew up with, which it didn't make any sense because, the Catholic Church had the same problems as well. I don't know how they dealt with them. I guess they just scorned people. So we were scorned.
Huh.
My dad was like, and once the baby came, within a year, then it was all fine. But her deal really was, what do I tell the neighbors? That was really what it was about. She wouldn't say that, but that was, how do you have to explain that? Because, we grew up in a tight knit community. And if somebody says, hey, did you hear John ran off to California? Oh, I think he got a girl pregnant. Well, then my mom, what does she do at the grocery store when people are gossiping about her? Or what does she do when she goes to church and people say, hey, I heard John went off to California. Then she has to explain it. Didn't like that. And that's what would get her mad. So.
But you were fine with it. You weren't worried about what people thought of you.
Couldn't have cared less. Still don't. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. That was one of my heroes growing up was her dad. So my grandpa, he knew, because his last name was Hunter, but he knew what we were up against. And he had all kinds of what I would call country wisdom. And one of the things he taught us growing up, which I loved, was other people's opinions of me are none of my business. And I loved that, because if I worried about like I was telling you off air that I posted something on Twitter this morning and I got a bunch of hate neo-Nazi crap because of my last name. I don't get upset about it. You just go, that's them. If they want to have some fun with it, let them have some fun with it. If I'm providing entertainment if they're taking advantage at my expense, what do I care? That's about them. That's not about me. So I just don't really. That was one of the benefits of growing up with being teased and bullied and all that. Was you either toughened up or you're going to never leave the house, and we were pretty tough because all my siblings weren't going to. They weren't going to sit around and do nothing because kids picked on you. That we're going to be out in the world, and so.
Cool. Okay, wait, and then the Georgetown thing, you literally turn up, you hadn't been accepted, and then you're just like, I know that some other kids have a place here. So I want to take a spot.
I'm fairly logical, and I think I'm an economist by trade. I wasn't at the time, but I would think like logically, and I'm also, I don't know if I have a high risk profile because I'm optimistic, or I'm optimistic because I have a high risk profile. But the two go very well together. So like my kids will say, what they say about me is, oh yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Because I'll do all kinds of crazy long shot things and make them work somehow. And they go, how did you make that work? Because it never dawns on me that it won't work. So that was my thinking. But I knew that what I did know, I called ahead, and there were 1,900 kids in the incoming freshman class. And I thought, what are the chances that all 1,900 show up on day one? 0. Somebody's going to, have a situation at the end. Well, sure enough, when I got there, I found out in the process, I wasn't supposed to, but I found out there were 4 that didn't show up. So then we're off to the races. So if you're the gatekeeper, I'd say, well, gee, Delia, the dean of not letting kids in, why can't I just take that other kid's spot? And they would read me the rule. They'd say, well, because you didn't apply, which is technically correct. But you say, well, so what? If that spot's going to go wasted and it's already slotted up, why not just take a shot? There's 0 risk that if I flunk out after one semester, you're no worse off. And So I would just keep going with these series of what would it take, or might it be possible, or would you consider? And if you were a really bad gatekeeper, I would just disengage, because what I didn't need was you going and alerting 10 other people to say there's a kid trying to get in and beat the system, because then I was screwed. So that was the only rule I kind of had for myself. It's a little like improv comedy. You never close. You always leave an opening so that the conversation keeps going. So I would make sure that I didn't offend anybody. I would ask innocent. And what happened was, there was a point at which it turned from there's this nut to, you know what, he's already got tentative permission to take over one of the spots. He doesn't have housing yet, but this might actually work. And then the people were kind of like interested, like an experiment. And then they got on my side, because it was like, oh, right, everybody has to be in a dorm for first semester. So he does have housing. As long as if I'm taking your spot, I just take your dorm spot too. And then they'd say, well, what about your schedule? What are you going to take for classes? I say, it's first semester, freshman year. Who cares? I'll take whatever they had a schedule. I'll just take their schedule. And there'll be a history class, and there'll be a math class, and there'll be a elective or whatever. And it was just an iterative process. And it took about 3 days, and I was in the freshman class. We were off to the races. So it was actually quite fun. But it was
And
never, it was never decided until I was in. Well, that was the other part, was I got all 4 people that didn't show up had financial aid. And I convinced them to put all 4 of those people's financial aids into my account, because I had no money. I mean, I had enough traveling money, but we had a baby on the way. We needed to get all kinds of stuff. For all practical purposes, I had no money. But once they dumped 4 other people, you had $1,000 funding, and the one person had $4,000. It was not it's like today it's $88,000 a year. You can imagine it was a long time ago, but it was the equivalent of that. And how do you pay for that? And so they dumped a bunch of financial aid in from the 4 people that didn't show up, because all that money was going to go wasted. And some of it, you could only have one of those financial aids. And I took all 4 of them, because I convinced them. It was federal grants from the U.S. government. And we said, well, they're in Washington, D.C. And I said, how often do the feds actually do an audit and know where the money goes? And they looked at me like, he's got a point. They have no idea where the money goes. So they just took all 4 of those grants and put them into my account, which is illegal. And I did that for 4 years.
Wow. And that covered all your tuition.
Because the government they have no idea what they spend money on. So. Yeah.
Cool. Wait, so that covered your tuition?
Not quite.
And okay.
But I was happy to work, and I did. I worked actually 2 full-time jobs while I was in school. So I made more in college than most kids. I made twice as much in college than most students got in their first job. I was making about $45,000 in a time when opening jobs were $22,500 or maybe $25,000, and I was making $45,000 as a chef, and then I'd work midnight security as well, and that's when I do my homework. So, but I could make really good money, and then I also, in the summertime when I didn't have to go to school, I'd paint houses and I was just like I did as a kid. I would just rustle up work and make really good money in the summertime, and
Amazing.
save up a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking for the funding, okay, like it's going to tuition. It's not like you're like taking this financial aid money and like spending it on booze. Like it's
no,
going to your
because my daughter had enormous medical bills and we had to pay them. So it wasn't like we had any extra money. In fact, the medical bills monthly, they finally put us on a monthly plan where twice what our rent was. When we finally were under one roof, they were twice as expensive as our rent. That's how she had $2.5 million in medical bills. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have to pay all of it, but we had to pay a chunk of it. And, yeah, it's not like we ever had any extra money. There was always, because on top of that, then, she had appointments that weren't part of the debt. They were just ongoing appointments because she just had all kinds of, first couple of years, she had to just get healthy. So she was just born really young and very small. So you have complications. It's okay. She's healthy. She's good. It's all good. But, Yeah. And you're doing that at 18 and 19. You grow up fast. So, yeah.
And why was it that you really wanted to go to Georgetown?
Because they had the only international diplomat, or it's called School of Foreign Service. I now know that I'm the least diplomatic person on the planet. That would have been a terrible career for me, but it sounded super cool. And there was only one school like it in the country. And of course, because there's only one school like that in the country, it's insanely hard to get into. And I didn't get into that one they have 5 different schools. And so that's what I wanted. And they laughed at me. They were just like, yeah, right. You in the Foreign Service School. No. So they let me into the School of Languages and Linguistics. And what I did was I did the same curriculum that I would have done in the Foreign Service School from the wrong school, with a couple of exceptions. In the School of Languages and Linguistics, you had to do at least a minor in linguistics. So I did a minor in German linguistics, and I double majored in economics and German. So I did an international economics degree, which I would have done something like that. I would have done in the School of Foreign Service. I just did it from the wrong school. Fine.
Okay, got it.
But
This is so cool.
School of Languages and Linguistics is not as popular. So they had holes there, and they said, well, if you would consider being a German major, we're undersubscribed for German majors. And I said, you want me to be a German major? I haven't even started school yet. I said, I'll be a German major. I spoke some German, and I took it in high school. I said, sure, I'll be a German major. And I actually graduated with a German degree in German language. Fine.
Amazing. And they weren't, so you'd applied the previous year and been rejected, but you hadn't applied that year, and they didn't care that it was like,
nope,
you were rejected in the past.
I didn't make the wait list. I was nothing. I didn't make anything. So it was as if I didn't exist. So because I wasn't in their system.
Cool.
And maybe that helped. I don't know that I don't know if it helped or not. I didn't care. I had one job. I had to get in. So
this is great. Okay, jumping ahead a lot, but how did you end up adopting 3 children from Russia?
So there's a lot of I've had the short version. I was smuggling technology out of a foreign country after the fall of the Soviet Union. I can't tell you which country because I'm still connected to some of those people, but they would allow us to come over, and it was illegal to take their technology, which we didn't have in the United States. But they had no market for it. So we would bring it back to the United States, find buyers for it, and set up a partnership and build companies around it, and then send them back money so they could fund their institution. It was an institution. While I was there, though, it was unsafe for Americans to just hang out. It wasn't a touristy kind of city because it was former Soviet Union, so they were still very anti-American. So I said, while you're there having meetings, and I have to go for like 10 days at a time, you basically stayed in a hotel room with a 13-inch black and white TV with 3 Russian sanctioned television stations. So nothing to do, basically stuck in prison for 10 days. So I asked the church that I went to, is there anything I could do like for service work? And they said, well, why don't you evangelize? And I said, because I'll be in a prison if I do. And I'm not a Bible thumper. I don't, I live my life, but I'm not going to do Bible thumping. They said, well, how about working in an orphanage? And I did. And I went the first day and I puked. I was so, it was like a high school gymnasium with about 200 cribs, each with a kid, smelled like feces and urine, and not a sound, not one sound. Because there's one person, like a security guard. They call them the head of the orphanage. They sit at the front. They don't change their diapers. They feed them in their crib, and the kids have learned that there's no reason to cry or do anything because nobody's ever going to come anyhow. So it's just eerie silence. I'm thinking, how can 252-year-olds or 1-year-olds not make any noise? Well, their brains were also rotting. And that's the orphanage I worked in. And all I would do is go and I could just sit and hold babies, like give him some human attention. But I did that for like 10 days. And I came home and talked to my now ex-wife and said, we had a son together, and she had older children from an earlier marriage. And so we had thought about having a second child, but we didn't need to do it biologically. We had both had kids biologically. So we had talked about adoption. I said, I know where we can adopt a kid from. And it wasn't that country, but it was Russia was the easiest in terms of the process. So that's where we went and adopted a 2-year-old. And it's illegal to break up siblings in the Russian system, but they did because it's run by the Russian mafia. So they took the 2-year-old and separated him from his 4-year-old brother and his 8-year-old sister. We unknowingly adopt the 2-year-old thinking he's a solo child. And as soon as this ink was dry, we're still in Russia. They, through a translator, they said, that's so great. You're going to adopt Sasha. Are you going to adopt his brother and sister too? And I was like, excuse me? No, we adopted one child. He said, oh yeah, but he's got a brother and sister. Are you going to adopt them too? I was like, shit. We didn't bargain for that. And it's one of those things that you have to just take a moment. And for us, the moment was about 90 days. We had to go home and settle. And he was a very difficult acclimation to our household. He had a tough time, all that kind of stuff. So you're just exhausted. And it was obvious though, do you go back and get the other two? And the obvious answer was, look, somebody thinks we're worth doing more than somebody had a bigger plan than we do. So you could say it's the hand of God. We kind of looked at it and said, why couldn't we go back and get the other two? And so we did. We went back and got 2 more. And then I started a foundation there as well to sponsor the kids when they get out of the orphanage, because that's the real tragedy is imagine you're 16, you graduate from the orphanage system with as much education as you got when you were there, and the clothes on your back, and they send you to the streets because the government there is done with you. Those kids are the average life expectancy for the boys was 22, and the girls would basically go into prostitution. And so when we adopted the older kids in our family, we saw the tail end of the cycle and said, we can do better than that. So I started a foundation and ran that for several years, but started that right after 9/11, which was very difficult to do because we had to have legal paperwork in Russia or we were in trouble. And try starting an international foundation right after 9/11. Nobody wants to talk to you, including the U.S. They didn't want to do it. And that's the short version. So we have, and then we helped another dozen families here. We recruited families, like solicited and said, why not? Why couldn't you take a kid from Russia? And lots of them did. And most of those were great success stories. A couple of them were tricky because some of the kids are, they're just, you can't imagine the horrors they've had. And most of them just thrive with a family structure and some support. Some of them just couldn't get over all that had happened. But yeah, it's very sad. But no, our kids are all good. And in fact, my daughter's getting married. One of my daughters is getting married less than 4 weeks from now. And and the other one's engaged. And then the youngest one has a boyfriend. The youngest boy has a boyfriend, and he's been in a relationship for about 5 years. But they're all happy and healthy and doing well. So
amazing. Wait, and how did you end up in that former Soviet country to begin with?
I was asked to invest in what was called a technology exchange. So I was just an investor, and I could tell all the money was gone, and the guy who was running it was shifty. So I had met the scientists that were involved in the foreign government's team. They'd come over to the Silicon Valley. I'd met them. So I was able to contact them directly. I wasn't supposed to. I was forbidden from doing that. And then I realized why. Once I talked to the scientists, I said, are you getting any of the funding that we raised a bunch of money here? And are you getting any funding at all? And they said, no. They said, we don't get any funding until we sell something. And I said, got it. But I had to go over there to have that conversation. I couldn't do it on the phone because their phones were all tapped. So I had to do it secretly. So I had to fly over there. And once they told me they weren't getting any money, I knew that the CEO in the United States was a crook. And so I told the guys in Eastern Europe, you should stop working with them because they have tons of money. They're not giving it to you. They've stolen the money. And they said, could you help us? And I said, well, I'm not going to raise more money, but here's what I can do. I can take technology back and find buyers. And when we find buyers, I'll send you back the money. And so I would go about every other year. I'd go and they'd give me 5 inventions. I'd look at 100 illegally, put 5 in my suitcase and take them with me. And then I'd make a deal with GE Medical or Intel, or I made them with all kinds of people. They had amazing technology. They just had no way to get it to market. They were socialists trying to be capitalists. It was never going to work. They needed capitalists to make the deals. And I was the capitalist and they were the scientists. And so I did that for, I probably shouldn't say, I did for a while. So, because we called it importing. The world would call it smuggling. So.
Yeah, but you were just going around a system, and it's like Robin Hood stuff. Like you were giving money to the people who.
The trick was
Robin Hood was stealing from the rich. No, you weren't stealing from anyone.
No,
you were giving.
But here was the problem. If I got caught at the airport with any of this technology in my suitcase, I'd be in a prison for 10 years. Imagine being in a Russian prison for 10 years. And it would have been a different country, but the same system. And so that was the risk. So what I had to figure out is how to get it out without any chance of being caught. And I figured that out, and I did it with a partner. And we would work as a tag team and to get the stuff out. Getting it out was that was the dangerous part, and not having the scientists there implicated with us. So we had to get it out as if we didn't know them. So we had this cloak and dagger. It was like a B grade movie. It was pretty funny, but we would get it out, and then we didn't sell all of it. Some of it's still sitting in my garage. I've still got stuff there that's amazing, and I don't do that anymore. So but the stuff that we could find partners for, super valuable, and it had commercial. I mean, you could get big money for it. So we'd make a deal with Intel. There's money there, and we did. We made a deal with GE Medical. There's money there, and we'd send back tons of money. So it's funny, it was illegal to do all this, but they never said a word when we sent money back, because it's like, hey, regulators, where the fuck do you think the money's coming from? You're not complaining about that. Shouldn't that be illegal too, that we're sending you a bunch of money? They never cared about that. As long as the money came in their favor, they would turn their head and say, oh yeah, we'll take some of it and we'll give some of it to the scientists. So it was all kind of it was really a B grade movie, but it was fun and successful.
Wow. Was your family annoyed at you for taking that risk?
They had no idea. They just knew I was going on a business trip. They had no idea. Yeah. Now they would have known. Yeah, they would have known had I ended up in a prison. They said, "Where's Dad? We're not going to see him for a while." But no, once I knew the system and how to get stuff out, I wasn't too worried about it, and it was really kind of fun.
And the dodgy CEO didn't give you any trouble?
I called him up and I said, so it's one of two things. Either you knew that this was a scam and you're incompetent, or you're running the scam. Either way, you're done. That's why he forbade me from going to the country. And I said, I'm going to talk to them. He said, no, you can't do that. That's my job. And I said, I'm going. And that's when I knew before I left that the gig was up. But I had to go talk to the scientists, and I couldn't do that on the phone because they can't, all their phones are tapped. So I had to go there and meet with them, and you have to meet with them in a specific way that they don't associate. So I had to go in as if I was a medical patient. I was there officially for medical treatment, and they were my physicians. And it was like, I had nothing wrong with me, but I'd go into the clinic every day for 4 hours and talk to them and have meetings and not be discovered. And then some days they'd bring their medical bag filled with technologies that I was interested in, and they'd open that up and say, what do you think about this? You want to buy this? No, I don't think I can. What about this? You want to buy a remote control? No, I don't think I can. And then they'd show me stuff and say, that I can sell, that I can find you a buyer for. And so it was kind of fun.
Wow. Okay. So that's your sense of adventure.
Oh yeah. Well, it was no different than the Georgetown thing. It was, how could this possibly work? I could get arrested maybe, or thrown out, or security could, you go, no, it's just a game. It's just fun. and and there's an outcome that you want, and you keep playing until you win. And there are no rules, because the truth is there's really no rules in life. The rules you have and the rules I have are the ones we make up for ourselves. You can say, "Oh, it's so unfair that people do this," and you go, "Well, yeah, but you agreed to it. Uh, even if it's unfair, you agreed to it. So then you're putting that rule on yourself." It's like, why? Why would you do that? So,
Okay, I know we're running out of time, and I feel like you must have so many other good stories. We're barely scratched the surface. But what's the one message you would say to people about finding their genius talent?
the simple message is find it, because we're not trained, or there's no roadmap for it, and there's no support for it. So you're going to have to find it yourself. And once you find it, build your life around it, because it's literally the theory we've always had. We have a methodology for finding it. We call it genius talent discovery. Our theory is that it's in your DNA. So if it was put in your DNA, it's either a genetic lottery, and you're not going to change it because it's in your DNA, or I call it the greatest gift from God. It's God's greatest gift to you, is this individual genius talent. And for most people, if we said, "I've got a suitcase here with $1 million, just tell me what yours is," and you get it, they go, I don't know, I'm pretty good at fixing things. You go, that's it? That's so not helpful for running your life. Once you get it very clearly, the language and the power, then you say, "Oh, that's why I'm always attracted to this. And that's why I really thrive in this. Mine is super odd and very sparsely used. But when it's needed, it's incredibly valuable. People pay a fortune for it. And I get to do things that I'm uniquely built to do." Had I never figured out what it was, I still would have used it. Like in Georgetown, I used it. I didn't know I had it. I certainly, sorry, I may have known inklings that I had it, but I didn't know what it was. And I didn't proactively put it to use. Had I known how to do it, it would have been easier, and I would have used it earlier. I didn't figure it out until I was about 30. And since then, I've built my whole life around it. Well, that's what I'd say. Go find it. There's different methodologies. I'm biased. I think ours is the most pinpointed. I don't say it's the best, but there's a lot of assessment tests that say you're a red, green, yellow, blue, or you're a fish or a dog or a dolphin. You go, okay, that doesn't help me. Tell me what I can do. That's what we help people do. It's a 3-hour process, and it's super fun. And you'll walk away with specifically, this is exactly what I do. I do it by this, this, and this, and here's my why. Here's why I do it, because that's the other thing. When you're given a gift, like a gift of talent, let's say it came from God, there's probably a reason you got it and not me. And there's probably a reason I got mine and not you. What's that? That's your purpose on the planet. So all that comes into focus, and you go, oh, way easier to live my life knowing that, because now I can step into it. So, sorry,
Cool.
that for me is the short answer, as you've come to notice.
And I guess it's just nice to be like, cool, we each do have something special and unique about ourselves.
People ask me, because I've done it maybe 7,500 times, like individually with people. I've done the process, and they say, "Well, how do you know what Delia's talent is?" I say, I don't. I have zero bias. I could care less. I don't try to steer you and say, we need more people that do this, or we need more people that do this. Let me see if I can convince. No, it's a very self-reflective, and I actually tease it out of you, and then I just put the dots together and go, could it be this? And they go, and oftentimes what happens is they cry. They go, how did you know? I said, I don't know. I'm asking. And they go, yeah. And I was punished for, a lot of times I was punished for it or teased for it as a kid, because it's oftentimes what was quirky about you as a kid. It's because if you had it in your DNA, you've been doing it since birth. So you're the oddball a little bit with this what seems like a quirky talent because they're not useful necessarily for school. So now you're doing things in school that they go, well, Delia doesn't follow instructions. Right, because you weren't built to follow those instructions. You were built, well, find that out. And as an adult, what makes you quirky or maybe odd or maybe super talented as a little kid, man, it's got great joy. And also for most people, it's also got great opportunity, financial, but like career wise, like why not set your whole career up around what you were built to do uniquely? That'd be awesome. So that's what I've been able to do, which is really fun.
Amazing. Okay, so where do people find you if you want to be found? Or I guess for any CEOs, because that's your main coaching, right?
So I do it with anybody, but yeah, it's if I'm fortunate with my last name that nobody has SEO with my name except me, so I'm not hard to find, and you'll see books or companies, or it's called Genius Talent Discovery, but my company will be on there and poke around. But it's called Genius Talent Discovery is the process. It's on our website. But the company name is Evoking Genius. Calling forth genius is what we call the company, and that's both for coaching CEOs, but also for individual genius talent. So, yeah, I'd be happy to talk to people and take good care of them. So.
Cool. Okay, last 3 quick questions. Is there a book that's had a big influence on you?
The biggest influence would be, it's called Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. He used the chaos theory and some sort of physics, like nuclear physics, to create an algorithm of what he calls levels of consciousness. And it's essentially where you sit on a power dynamic tied to an emotion. So at the bottom, absolute lowest power, so it's no power at all, is shame. And you think of, here we have homeless people sitting outside of a grocery store, staring down with a sign like this. They can't look in the eyes. Their dog is there, and they got a little cup hoping you put a coin in it. They have so little personal power because they're ashamed. They're essentially zero. And then you go all the way to the top where you'd say total enlightenment is at the top. But for most people, we're in the middle somewhere. Where do you fit, or where do you fall on the spectrum? And it's all based on an algorithm that anyone can verify. And then he gives you ways to move along the spectrum. So very, very interesting, because most of the world is run by people with power, and power being a state of consciousness. And most of the world, the noise is from people with force. And the way he describes force is an exercise in the necessary amount of dominance to achieve a result. So basically, do I have to go to war with you to get you to do what I want? Do I have to write a gigantic check? Do I have to manipulate? That's all force. And power, I'm paraphrasing, but power is an idea which has no counter, which is like possibility. You kind of say, well, what if we did this? And people go, that's a great idea. That's power. And you could do the same thing. It's the same, talking about the same conversation. You could be working in power and working in force. The book it's the Bible for coaching. So I've used it for a long time, but it's a super interesting, I would do it book on tape, because the first half is about the algorithm and it's all math. And then the second half is all the application, which is stories. And like, why is Mozart still popular 300 years later? Because it ranks super high using the algorithm. You go, he used it on music? Yep. And then you say, why is, I don't know, what's a guilty pleasure? Why are the Spice Girls not on the algorithm at all? That's why it's a guilty pleasure, because there was no power in that music. It was just fun. And it was fun until something else was more fun, and then we forget about it. And that's what most music is. It's popular for a month or two or 6 months, and then we kind of forget about it, and you bring it back on guilty pleasure day. You say, oh, this is my favorite song when I was 7 years old. You go, yeah, that song sucked when you were 7 years old and it still sucks, but it's fun.
Hey, no hating on the Spice Girls.
No, I
Okay,
like the
yeah,
Spice
this is
Girls.
cool.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
this is cool. And yeah, I guess for for anyone listening or yeah, feeling for that person literally on the side of the road, like feeling that shame, it's like it is. I mean, that's what I try and do with this podcast to like transform that shame because there's no
yep,
shame or judgment
yep.
here, and like we're all
Well,
humans
so
who experience
I'll,
adversity, and we all
I'll
have a genius talent, including
absolutely. For most people, and especially if they're suffering, I find that people who are suffering a lot are thinking they're kind of lost or they feel underappreciated or whatnot. Find your genius talent, and then owning it is a hard thing to actually say, who me? I'm going to create seemingly impossible outcomes that address multiple and divergent agendas. I don't know that I can do that. You go, we didn't make that up. You told it, that didn't come out of nowhere. Then to get them to own it and say, what if you took on that role? I go, I don't have any experience in that. You go, you don't need experience. You got talent. You'll kick ass versus the other people in there. Um, because you're natural, you'll figure it out. This is a perfect landscape for you. It's that whole process is, it's really fun to watch because people start opening up and you can take small steps and say, I'll try this. And then they go, wow, that was super fun. And I loved it. And you go, that's because you were built for this. And oh, by the way, if you were built for that, there's 99% of the crap that you could be doing that you're probably not built for at all. And there's going to be a level of suffering in that. And where it's most pronounced is when people are, they're in a profession that pays well, that's soul sucking for who they are. So that can be, for instance, a perfect one. I'm a CPA. You can make good money as a CPA, but what if you're trained to do that and you don't have any natural affinity for it? It's just it's a perfect trap because then you have some lifestyle and some income, and every day you have to drag your ass out of bed and say, oh, I gotta go do this again. I hate it, but it pays me really well. What if you had both? I make way more now than because now all I do is like coaching. The way I do coaching is all about my genius talent. So I help others create seemingly impossible outcomes. And they say, if you can help us with that, we'll pay $1 gazillion. And you say, cha-ching. All I'm doing is having fun. So when you do that, you put the two together, you say, oh, that's when it's really fun. So.
cool. So exciting.
Oh, you had 3 questions. I think you've done 2.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe you've
Um,
only done 1.
you're giving me too much to think about. Okay, how do you stay grounded?
Short version is rituals. So like working out for me is a ritual. Um, I have an infrared sauna. I sit in the infrared sauna. You can't go anywhere. Uh, it. I get out of there. I feel differently. It's I have an urban farm, small, but we put it in this year. I love it because I can just go out there, even if there's nothing to do. I can go putz in the urban farm, get my hands in the dirt. It's ritualistic, and it takes me out of. I find for me to stay grounded, it starts with my body. It doesn't start with my head or my heart. It's usually my body tells me I'm off and I have to do something. So a hike or a great workout, it wears me out enough and I reset and I get grounded. It's almost always in some form of a ritual. Cooking is also, I love to cook. So I work from home and my wife comes home. I do all the cooking. I used to be a chef. So the way I transition my day, the ritual is usually I'm dicing and slicing and chopping and creating. I never know what we're having for dinner until I start. And because it's quiet, sometimes I'll put music on, but usually it's just me in the kitchen by myself. And then she comes in and we start our evening, and it's a nice ritual. So for me, it's rituals are how I do it. And I've found some that work really, really well. So.
Cool. And last question, what 3 words describe the best version of John?
Yeah, so I actually have a process for doing this that I teach people. So I know mine really well. When I'm at my best, others describe me as generous. And when I'm doing my best, it's so I have a rule for myself: give of yourself first. So if I give of myself first and you don't reciprocate, that's okay. Maybe we're not meant to work together or to play together. Fine. But I give first. I'm generous. And it's not writing checks necessarily. It's money or energy or time or whatnot. So generous, encouraging. When I encourage people, I'm great. And when I'm tired or grumpy, I get petty. So it's interesting. It's one of the places I have to ground myself. And my wife will catch me. She'll say, "You use the word idiot 3 times today. You need to take this weekend off and not work." And I go, "Did I say idiot?" "Yeah, you said your best client was an idiot." And I said, "Oh God, I love that client." And she'll say, "I know you love that client. So stop referring to them as an idiot. That's you. That's not them." It's like, right. When I'm encouraging, I'm great. And the third one is bold. I only do well when I'm doing bold things. I don't do small. I don't do timid. It's not bombastic, but I don't like unambitious or wimpy. If you're going to go work out, train. I mean, like train like an athlete. Don't go and pretend like you're in the gym. Or if you're going to volunteer, go make a difference somewhere. Go and put your heart into it for a couple of hours. Don't go someplace so you can post pictures on social media about how good you are in the world. Go do something fully. And so when I play boldly, I'm a valuable human being, and when I don't, I'm something much less than that. So
Amazing.
generous, encouraging, and bold are the 3.
Love it. Thanks so much.
I'm curious,
Sorry
what are
we
your?
went way
Oh, that's
longer than I
okay.
said
I'm
we
curious,
would.
what are your 3?
Oh, I think they always change. Bold. I think the first time someone asked me on this, I think it was like bold or courageous or something like that. Kind, I think was one.
Yeah, that's a great
And
one.
honest, but I just am honest. I don't really know how to not be honest. So, actually, you say that in your TED talk that it's like one of the values, it's like honest is like table stakes. And you can't just be brutally honest because then you like, you have
So,
to be honest with love. So,
uh,
but it's
so are
probably
you?
authentic. It's
I
what
was
you
going
were
to say,
saying actually.
are you?
I'm
Yeah.
the same
So,
that I don't do transactional relationships. Like it's
yep.
like this is me, and it's like is is there some
I
connection? Otherwise, it's
yeah.
like not interesting to me.
Suspect it's either authentic or the other one that some people are. They're transparent. They tell the. It's not that they were dishonest, but you can be completely honest and edit the story in such a way that somebody gets the wrong impression. And transparent is you lay out everything. You say, "Oh, and then I screwed up." Well, if you leave that part out, you're not being dishonest. You're just editing. Because you could say, "Oh, this person, they were so rude to me in the store." And well, you left out the part that you swore at them. Oh, are you dishonest? No, you're editing. Now, if you're transparent, you just say, "God, I had the worst day today because this guy got in my face at the store, and then I lost it. I dropped the F-bomb on him." Well, that's transparent, and you say it has you be more human, and because that's why I don't like honesty, because you look at lawyers in the courtroom, they they have to whole truth, nothing but the truth, all that stuff, but editing's allowed. so so your job is to edit the story so it looks one way, and my job is to edit so it looks another way, and the jury doesn't know what to believe because you say that can't be the same story. Well, what if it were just transparent? What if everyone were transparent and said, "Well, this is what this. Sorry, this part happened too." Yeah, I bet you're either transparent or authentic is a much nicer version than honest. Honest sucks because there's no one that will claim they're dishonest. That's the other problem with honest, and so we know that's false. So why say you're honest? It's almost like you're protesting and saying, "No, no, 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 really, I'm the honest one." You go, "Sure you are," but authentic is great, or transparent is great.
Yeah. That's funny. That's like because I'm also obsessed with truth and like, I guess
Yeah,
that's why I do this because I'm just so interested. But if you call yourself a truth seeker, it's like a red flag. It's like
it's
you're some
yeah,
like
it's
conspiracy theorist.
yeah. It does sound a little funny. It's like what? Like nobody else deals with the truth. You're the only one. Yeah, it does. It's a little funny, but authentic though is great. Uh, you mentioned that. That's because who doesn't like authentic friends? Because that means you can actually have a bad day and just be authentic. You go, yeah, I'm having a bad day. You don't have to hide that. You don't have to pretend. You just go, I'm having a shit day. It's okay. I love you anyways. You're my friend. Yeah, and that's allowed. And oh, by the way, I'm allowed to have a shit day every once in a while too, and I don't get dismissed because of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Good for you.
Cool.
I love those three.
Thanks so much for doing this.
It was really fun. Yeah, thank you for having me. I've never been on a podcast like this. It was fun.